Lore and storytelling that is driven by tournament results in trading card games is a fascinating topic. And I want to delve deep into that. And what that means is the tournaments out there for Flesh and Blood, for instance, the winning hero of all of them, right? Whichever one wins the most affects the lore and the story of Flesh and Blood is what I'm talking about. And the best example that we've seen to date in Flesh and Blood is when Kasai wins the Deathmatch Arena. So back in Heavy Hitters, there's a bunch of heroes that come out in that set, and over the course of time, there's a bunch of tournaments. And Kasai had the most wins on their tracker for Legend Story Studios in the Heavy Hitter season. So then 3 months after that season, around 2 or 3 months, I believe, Legend Story Studios put out an article that says, hey, Kasai wins the Deathmatch Arena. And there's a whole lore story of how she did it and everything like that. And they basically say in so many words that the lore and the story for Flesh and Blood altered because Kasai had the most wins in real life. For instance, if Reinar or if any of the other Betsy or Victor, right? If any of them had the most wins, like let's say Betsy had the most wins, let's just say, then she would have won the deathmatch arena, and they would have created a whole lore story how Betsy, beat the shit out of everyone, right? But that didn't happen. Apparently, it was Kasai. So Kasai wins. They had the special Command and Conquer card for Kasai that they gave out to the winners there, and that was the end of that. But that's a really good example of how Legend Story Studios has very subtly put that into the game. It's like a baby step into that realm of tournament play affects lore and story. Now, personally, I like the concept. I think it's great. I think as long as you're not changing any like major story plot or elements, I think then it's great. Like, okay, there's like this tournament, or there's this the heavy hitters, you're in that your sphere, and all these heroes are battling out, and this is the one that won. Great. That doesn't affect the main storyline, but it's something that us as players can say, hey, this is what we drove to, getting certain heroes things. Now, I want to talk about Legend of the Five Rings first, and then I want to get into more critique on what I just talked about with heavy hitters and Kasai. Now, Legend of the Five Rings, L5R. I didn't play it. I've watched a lot of content about it. And from what I've heard, it had a really great, probably the best out of any TCG story-driven lore based off of tournament play and tournament results. And I want to talk about just the history of it. So from the beginning, they talked about this Day of Thunder. And this is like a third-party account. And this Day of Thunder was going to be a moment where there's a bunch of factions in L5R, right? You had the different clans, right? You had Crab Clan and Samurai Clan. That wasn't a clan. You had a lot of different clan names that I do not know, but they were all duking it out, right? And the Day of Thunder was supposed to be a day where the 8 clans or whatever have you, maybe 6 to 8 clans, I forget, they battled it out, and whichever clan won, then that clan would face off the big bad, and that would be the end lore story. Now, there's this guy, John Wick, I believe, who was the lore writer at the time, right? And he had 8 envelopes, one for each of the clan. And during the tournament, right, when one clan got kicked out, like when that clan got out, he would take the envelope with the stories. And there's 8 separate stories of each of the 8 clans, and each one talks about how that clan fought the big bad. So there's 8 different stories that could have been the final ending. But what he did after each clan dropped out, he would take that piece of paper and light it on fire. So he showed everyone out there, like, hey, this could have been a possibility, but now it's not. It is so visceral and raw and real, and you could see that people were really attached to this game. They cared about their clans, right? And when he lit them up, it really signified like, hey, this is This is the end of that storyline, right? And he did this 7 times until the final one was, the final person who won the tournament. That clan got to face off the big bad. And I think there's some other aspects where, out there where the top 2 people didn't really want to fight against each other and they wanted to, pick a different way of how they, got to the big bad. But long story short, the winner of the tournament, that was the story that unfolded because that clan won. They talked about that clan fighting the big bad in the story, in the lore. And that aspect, I think, is a really great way to emotionally tie your audience and your consumers to the product. I think a lot of times, especially in this AI driven world, right, you have things that are just so like disconnected from people feeling emotionally because things are like, right, this it doesn't really connect to them. But when you have these clans and you think, hey, you as a player who's facing off another player, the result of your match can affect what happens in the game. That adds so much more just feeling to it, right? An attachment, and you feel connected to whatever character, hero, or clan that you're fighting for. Now, I want to lean it back into Flesh and Blood, and I know I butchered the shit out of that story. I'll put a link down below to the exact story. Someone other than me is telling you, and they're going to explain it with a lot more exact things, and they're probably going to explain it a lot better. But long story short, L5R did a great job at story-driven content based off of tournament results. That's the whole topic of this video. So let me talk about Flesh and Blood and how they implemented it. Now, I think in the future, it would be really cool to have certain circumstances where players knew ahead of time that their actions and decisions and who they played would affect the lore. So if you look at heavy hitters, everyone at the time when they were playing their tournaments, they had no idea that they were affecting the lore, right? They had no idea. They were just playing the hero because it was best in that meta, and that's that. But then lo and behold, like 3 months after heavy hitters, and by that time, there's another set released at that time, like they didn't realize that the actions that they made had any effect, and it did affect the story. I think if you had it on the front end where Legend Stories Studios just blatantly says, hey, we have this little mini event, right? Just like heavy hitters, like, hey, the heroes in the set, whichever one wins the most things, like this happens. I think that would be pretty cool, right? So what I'm saying is I think in the future it'd be cool to see that on the front end where players, when they are playing in the tournaments, know that what they're doing has effects on the lore. I think that would be really cool. I think that's one tweak that I would have done from this event. Now, it's hard in that aspect because sometimes the players are like, hey, well, I just want to play the best deck and I don't want to be like, playing Reinar when I know that he isn't very good in the meta and it's just kind of angsty there. But it's still, I think that you're going to have a lot of people, right, out there who are good players who don't care. They're like, you know what? I love this hero. You're going to have people like Yazi, who's, living in a cave with his, get up and everything, who's going to play Reinar, regardless of anything. You're going to have a lot of those people who are really, like, encapsulated in the heroes that they're playing, right? And Yazi's a perfect example of that. He loves Reinar. Like, I like Bravo a lot, but I'm not that good looking. But long story short, I think that if players are aware on the front end before the tournaments that their actions have consequences or rewards, I think that's a really good way to get them engaged in that aspect of what you're doing. Another thing is really having good rewards or consequences, right? And I think the problem with what they were doing is if they said, well, everyone gets a command and conquer, right? Everyone would have just, like, once Kasai got like a little bit of a lead, everyone would have played Kasai. Because if you win, you got a command and conquer later down the road. If you lose, then you know that, or like if you win with another hero, you're not going to get that command and conquer there. So I think that's the inherent problem with if they had said something early on in the heavy hitter season when any of the heroes got just a little bit of a lead, then literally everyone would have been playing that hero in the tournament. It would have been like 95% people playing Kasai, and they're like, oh, I don't want to play Kasai, but I know if I if I win, then I get this extra thing. So that would have been the main problem if they had released that information ahead of time. But to that effect, I don't think you need to have an extra like reward, like a monetary reward at the end of it. I think that if you take that aspect out and you just say, hey, guys, there's really no extra thing that you get other than your hero is going to, that you choose if you win, you get something like it affects the story. That's it, and no extra stuff. I think that would have worked too. I think people, you would still see an engagement that way. But from analyzing what they did and my thought process of what they could have done, I'm like, well, they couldn't have told people ahead of time if they had this extra reward structure, because then people would have just cheesed it and you'd see 95% of the player base playing the same hero, which would have been a really shitty meta. It would have been very interesting, but it wouldn't have been a really nice meta. The other thing I want to talk about is having like stakes. And I guess, the monetary reward of having a Command and Conquer is the stakes in the heavy hitters. But I think just having a higher stakes in general for the lore would have been really cool. And what I mean by this is we have, for example, this is just something I thought of. You have living legend, right? When a hero has accomplished living legend status. What if you had living Legends End, right? And Legends End means, hey, you have 3 heroes out here. One of them is gonna die. The one that has the least amount of wins on the scoreboard after the season is going to achieve Legends End status, which is the same as Living Legend. You cannot play them anymore. And it's not because they got the most points on the leaderboard. It's because they didn't get enough points on the leaderboard in a certain amount of time. Then you just cull them. So I think that would be an interesting point of view. Like, hey, like, if you like this hero, you better play him, or if they don't make enough points, they are dead, right? It would put an emphasis on like, hey, like, there are consequences or rewards based off of this whole event that affect not only the gameplay outcome in the world of Flesh and Blood, or in the land of Wraith, but also affect gameplay and your playing ability in real life. Like, you cannot play this hero anymore. They dead. So they died before they could become a legend. They were young and vivacious, but they got stabbed in the heart or they took an arrow to the knee, and now they cannot be go to living legend status, and they cannot be played anymore. So I think the second aspect that I'm talking about is I think just more understanding from the players of what their impact is, right? When you had the Day of Thunder, you literally in L5R, you literally had the fate of the world is going to be decided in that day of that tournament with the 6 or 8 clans, right? And you had a visceral understanding of that with the different slips, and when you saw one go up in flame, you like, that's such a an understanding of like, wow, that really affected things, right? So I would really like to see that, and I think that it would be really good in like Worlds, right? Like Worlds, you have like the most amount of players there and people talking. I think that would be a really good point. And maybe not in Worlds. Maybe you have some other world type event that's really big, right? And you name it as such to just make people understand like, oh, this event is going to shape the lore. I think that would be pretty cool. I don't know. Well, I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts out there. Overall, it's really great to see that Legend Story Studios is like playing with this concept, and they're doing it in a light way at first, like, oh, hey, we're gonna have the battle arena and someone who wins, but overall all the heroes still live after the battle arena. They might be knocked out for a time period, but they get back up and you can still play as them. But it would be really interesting if you had different situations where, like, maybe in the finals 2 heroes face off, and like one player does certain ability, and then like another, the other hero has like their arm chopped off. I guess with what is it, the guy armed and dangerous, it's not Reinar, it's KO, right? Like, how did his arm fall off? Was it because of a certain action in real life? So it would be cool to have those types of things occur. But anyway, that's my thoughts on it overall. Long story short, I hope in the future with Flesh and Blood, I don't think they should go too hard like L5R. I'm not saying that. I think the L5R was its thing and it can stay its thing, but having certain side events or certain events out there which direct the gameplay, the lore in certain ways here or there, and do two things. One, the players understand at first like what's at stake, and really like that their gameplay has actions, and there's some type of effect that it has is huge. And then also really just making them understand the size of the effect that it has, right? Like how much effect. Because I think if people are like, well, they won their arena, great, and there's a little blurb, but if it means something like pretty big in the course of the lore, I think that would be a really great aspect to really encapsulate for people to really feel connected with the game in a deeper sense, to where they feel like their in-world actions affected a fantasy world. So, just my thoughts. Cheers, man.